A very good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Global Security Forum. Your Excellency, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us in Doha. We meet, of course, at a time of heightened tensions in this region, a sensitive time in this region, and I'd just like to address briefly, if we can, the Gaza conflict with you, because the African Union has been unequivocal in its condemnation of attacks of civilians in the Gaza Strip. You've called on the international community and major world powers to assume their responsibilities, in your own words, to urgently impose peace and guarantee the rights of Palestinians. How do we do that? And do you still have faith in this rules-based order?
Thank you very much. Thank you for receiving me, Folly. Our support and solidarity with Palestinian people is not new. As you know, Africa has been colonized, and we know more than everybody what means a colonial regime and an apartheid system. About what is going on in Gaza. From the beginning, from the first instance, we condemn in a very strongest terms what this devastating war is causing to Palestinian people. More than 35,000 people lost their lives. And the majority is children and women. It's not acceptable.
So how do we end then? How?
We should.
How?
I think the international community, particularly the big powers, precisely United States, have to act. They have to act. It is a shame for our humanity, watching every day people, children, women killed, and I think it causes a real problem of credibility of the international community, of multilateralism, of international law, of humanitarian international law. I think it is morally unacceptable.
Yeah. On this question of credibility, Your Excellency, we're seeing a consolidation of the global South when it comes to this crisis. The International Criminal Court, which has often been accused of focusing too much on Africa, perhaps is going to be requesting an arrest warrant for leaders of Hamas and Israel. We've also seen the case of genocide brought by South Africa at the International Court of Justice, which is supported by the African Union in a number of African countries, the most significant one recently being South Africa. Do you still think, though, that international law can prevail in this conflict? And how does the African Union, an institution like the African Union, play a role in redefining this global order that you say is lacking credibility today?
I think we have to deal with what is now what we call the international law. That's why I think the courts, the justice, the international justice should take its responsibility. The United Nations, and particularly the Security Council, has to take his responsibility. As African, as Global South, I think people realize that there is double standards. And this is a real threat to our current system. So we have to revise it. At least we have to implement what we commonly decided for decades. So that's why I'm talking about credibility of the whole system. If you still continue to use double standard, I think a life of a Palestinian, of an Israeli, of an African is the same.
Right.
So we should respect this minimum. I think it is our right to tell our international community, our current institutions, to just apply what we decided, what we call the international legality. We have to implement it first. And I think this is a period that should push us to revise and to take the appropriate disposition for peace, stability, justice, equality between human beings.
Okay, one last question before we move on, because there's of course a great deal to discuss when it comes to the African continent. One last question on this issue. Israel has worked for years to develop relations with African countries. It was granted observer status in 2021 at the African Union, which has been suspended now. Is there a future still, you think, in relations between Israel and the African continent?
I think it depends at least for Israel to observe and to respect the international law and to respect the rights, the legitimate rights of Palestinian people. It is simple as this.
Okay, Your Excellency, thank you for that. The African Union Peace and Security Council is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. And this offers, of course, a moment of reflection on the recent progress and ongoing challenges. President Kagame addressed this in his intervention a short while ago. We are seeing for the first time in history 6 African countries suspended from the African Union after they experienced military takeovers. Coups are at their highest points on the continent. As recently as 2 days ago, there was an alleged attempted coup in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's now a coup belt, what's described as a coup belt on the continent from east to west. How do you reflect on these unconstitutional changes on the African continent? Has democracy failed our continent?
This phenomenon is a real challenge for African Union, for the African continent. As you said, for the first time, there is 6 African countries suspended from African Union because of unconstitutional change. And we are celebrating next weekend the 20th anniversary of our Peace and Security Council. So I think it is this issue of unconstitutional change is the top of our agenda in a few days. And we have to evaluate. To evaluate, there is a risk for the credibility of our peace and security architecture. Because 20 years ago, we set this instrument, which is Peace and Security Council. And this phenomenon of unconstitutional change, you can add also the lack of solidarity. That's why I appreciate what has been said by President Kagame. When he discussed with President Nyusi of Mozambique and decided to send Rwandan troops to Mozambique, they consulted me, both of them. And I strongly supported this, because this is a proof of solidarity between African countries. There is a lack. For example, in the fight against terrorism, if you see 3 or 4 of Sahel states, when there is coup d'etat, all these countries are facing terrorist attacks. And the explanation, the reason of the military is that there is a security challenge,
Right.
and the civilians, president, are not able to deal with it. So we decided as army to take the power and to protect our nation.
Because some of these unconstitutional changes have enjoyed popular support in some of these countries,
Absolutely.
whether it's Burkina Faso
Absolutely.
or Mali. So how do you reconcile that?
I think that's why
Yeah.
I think the 20th anniversary is an opportunity for the member of Peace and Security Council, and even for the whole member of the African Union, to evaluate. Should we suspend every country where there is a coup. What kind of coup?
Are all coups
So
a bad thing?
I think, and even
Yeah.
President Kagame said it, maybe with nuance, we don't apply the same rules to all the cases. So if you make exception, it is very dangerous. It could create a precedent, a jurisprudence. So I think we need to be in conformity with our reality, not having text norms, and the reality is different. So we have to coordinate and to be in phase with this step in the history of our continent. I think it is very, very important.
So what's your advice then to African governments who want to reduce the chances of a coup in their countries? Who want to reduce the chances of a coup in their country? What is your advice to them to avoid
I
these
think
unconstitutional changes?
the issue is a governance issue. It is essentially a governance issue. It is about justice. It was about equity between the population of a country. So I think it is not with norms at the level of the regional or the continental institution that we can resolve it. I think fundamentally it is an issue of governance. You have to improve governance. When people will be in phase and agree with the kind of governance in their country, I think we can reduce this kind of unconstitutional change in the countries.
The theme for this forum, Your Excellency, is strategic partnership. And you have today Russia, for example, offering itself as a partner to some of the coup leaders on the continent. It seems that Africa has become the stage for a battle of influence among major powers, which we heard about in the previous session, China, Russia, the US. How do we avoid turning Africa into a geostrategic battleground for these global powers? What efforts needs to happen to strengthen Africa's geopolitical effectiveness and also its unity? How do we avoid turning it into a battleground for global powers?
I think when we transform OAU, the Organization of African Unity, to African Union,
right,
is in order to unite the continent and to speak with one voice, particularly in the international arena. One of our main objective is integration and to talk with one voice. Now we have a lot of partnership with United States, Europe, China, Russia, Turkey, Arab world. We have different kind of partnership. So we have to coordinate it and to give power, real power, to the continental bodies as African Union to talk to the continent, to be the spokesperson, a kind of spokesperson, to defend the interests of our continent. But I should recognize now we are not united as we want, and sometimes we feel that member states don't follow what has been decided at the level of the continent, and sometimes deal themselves with some countries. So we need a real effort to unite, to speak with one voice, in order to strengthen the position of Africa in the international arena.
Right.
It is a real challenge also for us.
On the question of terrorism, which you touched on a bit, if we could focus on it a little bit more. I mean, it's still ravaging the continent. It's happening everywhere in the Sahel region, in the southern region of Africa, in Mozambique, in the Horn of Africa. And there's a substantial increase in both the frequency of these attacks and their lethal nature. The 2023 Global Terrorism Report stated that the Sahel region alone accounted for more deaths from terrorism in 2022 than Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa regions combined. And you talked about unity, and it seems like when it comes to the question of terrorism, each country is basically fending off this threat on its own. And the UN hasn't really been doing much, and each country is dealing with this threat on its own. How do we shift from a reactive response to the question of terrorism to a more preemptive approach on this issue?
I think terrorism is a threat to peace and security in the world. That's why, for more than a decade, it is in the center of our plea for a new doctrine, because we feel that the cases in Africa are not treated normally, particularly by the United Nations, and particularly by the Security Council. We feel that there is an international solidarity in other parts of the world, but in Africa, we let Africans alone to fight against terrorism. We, for more than decades, were fighting how to finance our own mission against terrorism. You remember in the Sahel, the states organized themselves and created the G5 Sahel force, for example. But we didn't have any support from the Security Council. Recently, I think at the end of last year, there is a new resolution to finance 75% of the African peace mission. I think
which came after a long time, after 15 years of debate on this issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a progress, but I think more should be done to be able to. Unfortunately, different regions in the continent are contaminated.
Right.
Libya, the whole Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin, in the Horn of Africa, and even in the south, in Mozambique, and in the Great Lake region, even in DRC. So I think we need a new way to finance the fight against terrorism. And the international community, I think it is absolutely legitimate for us to ask for the United Nations and others to support us to face this terrible phenomenon.
This Security Council move agreeing to fund African Union-led peacekeeping missions, again, came after a very long time and a lot of debate. How do you see it being a game changer for peace and security efforts on the continent?
I said it is a progress. And we need to complete, because now, as I said, different regions are contaminated by terrorist groups. And we have to act immediately. Otherwise, it can expand and even completely destroy some states. As you know, in Africa, our states are young or fragile, so we need more support. And I think for the partners, they should realize that terrorism don't have borders. If the situation in Africa, as in Somalia, for almost 3 decades, so we will have more failed state, and it's very dangerous. Right. So we need a real support to fight against this phenomenon.
Just to focus on one or two of the crises right now that are grabbing headlines around the world, Sudan being one of them. It's been over a year of conflict in Sudan, millions of people displaced, thousands killed. What role are you playing in current negotiations to find a sustainable peace for Sudan?
In Sudan, from the beginning, the African Union Peace and Security Council met just the second day, the 16th of April. And 5 days after, we organized a meeting with the whole international community. The UN Secretary General attended. The 5 permanent members of UN Security Council attended themselves. The neighboring countries and others. We decided to launch an initiative, an African Union and IGAD, which is a regional organization, to to start negotiating and stop first the war. In the meantime, United States and Saudi Arabia started a process, Jeddah process in Saudi Arabia, when the parties accepted to sign a ceasefire agreement, but it's never respected. So now we're trying with IGAD, with other partners to organize a political process.
But how? How do you do that? How do you navigate and contend with all these different actors that are involved in this conflict?
Yes,
especially the external actors
this
also,
is the problem.
the UAE being one of them.
This is a problem. In general, in African crisis, there is a lot of external interferences. And it is an element of complication, not facilitation. So that's why we said, we can ask you to help, to support, even to be with us, but let us lead this process. And it is a real challenge. As it is well known that the international and the external interferences complicated things in Africa. It is the case in Sudan, unfortunately.
And so what about the crisis in the Great Lakes region, Rwanda and the DRC? There's a lot of acrimony between those two countries. What role are you playing in that specific crisis?
The African Union asked the president of Angola to mediate between DRC and Angola. As you know, in DRC, there is two processes. One is called the Nairobi process. It is dialogue negotiation between DRC government and the armed groups. There is a large number of them in the east of DRC. The second one is Luanda process, so negotiation between Angola and DRC. And we are supporting both of them. What we ask is there is no solution, military solution in DRC, as in every African conflict. So we need them to accept, to negotiate with Congolese groups. I think accepting the principle to negotiate doesn't mean to accept everything.
Right.
So we advise publicly DRC to negotiate even with M23 because they are Congolese, so they can discuss with them. And as African Union, we are ready to support all processes. So
you don't think the 5,000 SADC force that's going to be sent to the region to replace the East African force is a good idea?
Before these forces, there was an East African Community Force. African Union supported even financially this force. Unfortunately, after a few months, DRC refused this force and called for a SADC force. I think what is the most important thing is that it is obvious there not will be a military solution. So we need all of partners, all of neighbors, all of African institutions and the international community to help the parties to find a political solution to this kind of crisis.
Your Excellency, there are today millions of young Africans crossing oceans, deserts in search of a better life in Europe. They are climbing the wall now along the US-Mexico border. They are ending up trapped in countries like Tunisia, where they face persecution, risking everything for a chance at a better life. How does that reality today of these millions of young Africans risking it all in search of a better life, how does that reality resonate with you on a personal level?
It is very disappointing, sincerely, at least. What is going on? This is a result of the situation in the continent. Despite the fact it is a rich, maybe it can be prosperous, we face, we should recognize this, a real problem of governance. We face also insecurity and instability. That's why we are fighting for a real integration in the continent. With the signing of this agreement, AFCFTA, for more integration, I think we can create opportunities for young people to stay in Africa and to work for their own continent. Unfortunately, we are in a period, very difficult period. Instability, as you know, in West Africa, for example. ECOWAS, at the beginning, was the model of integration of the African Union system. Unfortunately, with this coup, with this unconstitutional change, there is a regress in this part of our continent. That's why we need, I think, a new way to deal with this situation. It is not an easy one, and it is very disappointing to see young people crossing Sahara. Some of them died because of lack of water, and the other in the Mediterranean to die because they want to reach Europe, thinking that it is an El Dorado. I think it is very, very difficult for us, and we should act.
But in the immediate, how do you deal with the crisis? Because we say we should act, but it's you have these migration policies that have been established by a number of European countries.
Yes.
What is the most urgent point and plan that needs to be enacted right now to deal with this issue of migration?
We are facing a situation. I think the first thing to do is to deal humanitarian manner with these migrants. Even if they cross the Mediterranean going to Europe, we have to treat them normally to respect their rights.
Yeah.
This is the first thing.
But in some African countries, like Tunisia, their rights are not even being respected.
Yes, it is a very difficult situation. In the transit countries, in Libya, in Tunisia, they are facing mistreatment. We are aware of this. We tried to speak to, I visited myself 2 times Libya, and we sent a delegation to Tunisia to treat these migrants with respect. And we need more solidarity, and in order to keep these young people in the continent, not let them go to this advantage. It's very dangerous.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this is a reality.
It is a reality. We're almost coming to the end of our conversation. I wanted to ask you 1 or 2 more questions. Your second mandate as chairperson of the African Union Commission is soon coming to an end.
Yeah.
You're stepping down at the beginning of 2025. How do you reflect on your tenure? What have been your proudest achievements as chairperson of the African Union Commission, and where do you think you could have done better?
I think it's not easy to talk about oneself. I think it is maybe not decent. I let it to others, like you journalists, maybe to appreciate, to assess. But what I can say, I think achievements are there, but also weaknesses. Maybe more weaknesses than achievements. I did my best with the means I have in my hand. And I think Africa is facing a real challenge. We need to act, I repeat this term every time, properly. We need more political will from leaders, and we should be aware that the future of this continent is in our hand. Waiting for others is not a solution.
What advice would you give to your successor?
To be patient, audacious. We have a reform project in process. Unfortunately, member states didn't and don't want to give power to the chairperson of the African Union Commission. I think it is not the best way. I think it is necessary for a body like African Unions, if we want really to realize integration, for Africa to speak with one voice, we need absolutely to give a minimum of attribution to this position in order to defend. And absolutely, he should be accountable. But how can you appoint someone and don't give him the means to act, it is frustrating. So I think the new chair, I hope, because President Kagame gives the championship of the reform to President Ruto of Kenya. I met him. He's decided to push the process. I hope in the end of this process, everybody should be aware of the necessity to change things. And maybe we can do more and better.
And what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next after you finish your role?
I think after 8 years, I am the first one who did 2 terms as chairperson of the African Union Council. So I need maybe a sabbatic time to go to pray. And maybe I should write something to share my experience. For the rest, I give it to Allah as believer, give it to Allah, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. A round of applause for Moussa Faki Mahamat, the chairperson of the African Union Commission. Thank you for a great conversation. Thank you.